Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Oil Runners broadcast. This is Kristen Love, your host for today. We got a few things that we want to chat about. Also, so before we get into the guest that we have today, so one, we do not do trolling, so let's make sure we don't do that. All right, because we love all of you, and we want to make sure that you have the ability and all the whatever you need to be able to get through life and to help. We want to help you be the best versions of yourselves. All right. So let's inspire, learn, grow together. Um, Two, we want to thank our sponsors. Please go wake up Mr. Michael W. Rogers with Michael W. Rogers photo at Gmail. Oh no, I'm sorry. Michael W. Rogers photo.com. Okay, wake him up. Just wake him up. He needs a job to do. All right. But no, he has a lot of great things that he's doing with his photography, and he is located in Las Vegas. So if you need photos done, headshots, boudoir, anything, he is willing to do anything. Weddings, all that. Look him up, and he's willing to travel too. Um, just look him up. So go, please wake him up. Enjoy. And then we also want to thank our sponsors at Electric Lips Comics. Go look them up on Facebook as well and like their page and follow their page. They have merchandise, which is at elpmerch.com, ELPMERCH.com. Both their videos will be in this video. So if you look up here somewhere, right there, click on that link, you'll see their promo videos, okay? And it'll be at the end of the video as well. So today we have Kenny Lee Lewis. He we'll be bringing him in. We're going to find out exactly what he has done in his life, but I definitely know he is a guitarist, and you'll be surprised on who he was playing with, okay, back in the day. All right. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Okay, so we welcome in Mr. Kenny Lee Lewis. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great from sunny California, which is raining today actually, but usually it's sunny and it's been sunny all week and it's winter started to come on today, so that's good, finally. But usually by Thanksgiving it's here like that. But coming down here from Central Coast, California. Hi to everyone.
Hi. The what's it called? The Spirit Fingers. That's what that reminded me of.
Well, I'm a
Uh,
player, so I'm used to doing this all the time, so this is just a habit.
like yeah. I see that you have a great background right there. So definitely a musician.
Studio is an absolute mess. Right? It's kind of a warehouse, and I store things here in between gigs. But sometimes we have rehearsals here, and it looks pretty good. And I have sessions and clients. But right now, it's just a warehouse. But I did put a little light on Jimmy back there, and I got one of my own handmade basses here that I thought I'd put up. We can talk about that later.
Uh, Wait a minute. You handmade the bass?
Yeah, in fact, this bass went on the road with me this summer with Journey and Def Leppard, and we played all the arenas around the United States. And this was one of the basses that went with me. And I'm a luthier, and I make these because I can't find them the way I like them in the open market. So I make my own, but they're kind of unique. But we'll talk about that later.
That's pretty cool. All right. All right. So now we got to know your history. Like, where did you come from? Like, what's your
Okay, well, my father was born in California. He was born in Alhambra, which is a little town right next to the San Gabriel Mission. As you know, the mission
hmm
is on the West Coast, which was the early Spaniards in the early 1700s. Started in Alta California, down by Baja, and they started building these missions all the way up to San Francisco. And so from Loreto to Yerba Buena, they built like 20, 30 missions or so. And he was born near San Gabriel Mission in Los Angeles. And I now reside here in San Luis Obispo, which was, I think, the 10th mission which was built in 1722. So this is our early history we have out here. California doesn't have a whole lot of culture, but we do have this really old Spanish history. Because other than Disneyland and Hollywood and all that stuff, there's really not a lot of culture out here. San Francisco probably has the most culture of all the towns out here, including Sacramento, our capital. So my father was born in Alhambra, and he was 4F in World War II, so he was building bombers over at Lockheed and Burbank. And while he was doing that, he was courting my mom, and they became swing dancers, jitterbuggers. So my dad was really into swing music, listening to Benny Goodman,
Oh,
Count Basie and Lionel Hampton, the really good stuff. And so he had a stereo in the house in the 50s after the war. And he also was sort of a frustrated musician. He had a drum set, a guitar, and a sax. And so, I kind of grew up around that stuff in the house. So I grew up around swing music, even though I really didn't know that it was going to become a part of my life later on. But he was always immersed in listening to music around the house. And then my brother and sister became folkies in the early 60s and were doing Peter, Paul, and Mary and Ian and Sylvia and the Brothers Four, and even Dylan and Mamas and the Papas. So that was my early exposure into doing the hootenanny folky thing. And I did that as a very young age on ukulele because I couldn't get my hand around a guitar neck. I was too young. So I started on ukulele and started playing along with them at family functions around the house. And then the English invasion happened, and that's when electric guitar became at the forefront. And then it just went nuts from there. So that's kind of the early story of where I came from. We went from Los Angeles to Sacramento, which was the capital during my early childhood. And so I grew up around Northern California, around the influence of, the hippie flower power generation of San Francisco, the Fillmore, the Winterland, the Bill Graham KSAN radio station with Tom Donahue, which is a pirate station. And I got to hear all of that really rich, huge diversity of music when I was growing up in Sacramento up until the time I graduated from high school.
that is really a rich history right there. Now, with the music playing, did you ever do the dances, like the swing dances and all that stuff too, or just music?
My parents were great swing dancers. I never learned to do that kind of ballroom dancing. We did our form of hippy dippy dancing that was separated. The men and the women didn't necessarily connect. We would touch each other and stuff, but you've seen that. They used to call it acid dancing. When you go to a great
Yeah.
concert, they'd have the scarves and all this stuff. Well, the women really got into that part. The men, we just got into kind of funky R&B, singular kind of dancing because we had R&B too. It wasn't just hippy dippy. I mean, we had Tower of Power, we had Santana, we had Latin music, we had funk, we had lots of different types of flavors of music going on in the Bay Area at that time. So we had a really wide diversity of music to dance to, but usually you did it on your own. And disco appeared in the late 70s. We were all dancing apart from one another and just going like this.
Right, where everybody's drugged up and nobody knows what they're doing. Like you won't remember yesterday, so I'm just gonna do it this way. Like,
We were doing
kind of
our
thing.
baby. That's what it was called. Do your thing. So that's what it was.
That's pretty cool. Now, how did you get like as an older, what was your initial break into the industry with touring and all that stuff? Like who was your first
Well,
band or
well,
whoever?
I ended at the English invasion, my last story, and that led us up to that. When the English invasion occurred, I got a sickness about an electric guitar. I had to get one. I ended up borrowing a bunch. I had a paper out. I eventually bought my own guitar and amp and kind of taught myself. Took a few lessons, but I just had this. I had this gift, and it was like I didn't know how to explain it. My brother was pretty good at guitar. My dad was pretty good at guitar. They showed me chords. But I just have this natural ability to be able to mime guitar players on a fretted instrument. It didn't have to be just a guitar. It could be a ukulele. It could be a bass. It could be a 12-string guitar. I mean, I just had this natural ability for fretted instruments. And so it just kind of came easy to me. And I didn't know it at first, but I had older people that I was hanging around. They said, "Hey, you got a gift. You're pretty good at that. You should practice more." And so that's what happened. I went into the woodshed in the bedroom. I didn't date much. I was a baby of the family. My brother and sister were already gone out of the house by then. And so, I was not very popular. We moved in the middle of sixth grade. So I had to start all over again. And one of the things that I
Mm.
started over again was at the new school I went to, I met a guy that had a band and he was in sixth grade and he was writing original material with a band in the sixth grade. And I was like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. So I got involved with him and then he showed me stuff and I started my own bands and then, eventually started playing school dances and YMCA and D-Malay, Rainbow Girls, you name it. We do it, you get your hands on, sororities, fraternities. And so eventually, we started doing, paid gigs. We weren't making a fortune at it, but I was working in a music store at the time. So I was making money doing that. Plus, I was doing the gigs at night. And between all of it, I was able to pay for an apartment. And I moved out very early. In fact, was just finishing up my senior year in high school, and I graduated early, and I went to college a year early. And that's when I had my own apartment. I was 17 and a half years old. And it was pretty crazy. And so I started out pretty young, pretty early. Probably should have stayed in the oven a little longer, but that was, back then thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But, I had some experiences that I probably should have been around some family grown-ups a little longer. But my parents moved to LA. My dad got promoted. They said I had a choice. I could stay in college and keep playing my music up in Sacramento or come down and move to LA with them, which I eventually did. It took me about a year to make that decision, but I did really well. I went to college. I went to the jazz program, learned how to read notation. I played both bass and guitar in the jazz band and got very proficient at being a player. And so I moved to LA a year after that to go to college, second year at CSUN, and joined that jazz band, which was huge. And I couldn't get in. So I got disgruntled and I ended up joining a band. There's a long story attached to that, but I went on the road with one of these California copy bands, with a female vocalist up front. We all had outfits and we went out to steakhouse all over the United States. So that's when I was 18. So I went on the road when I was 18 playing cover music. And that was my first experience going on the road, as you asked.
That okay, so at 17, I graduated myself too. I get that. I have never had a journey like that one. Um,
Pretty fast and furious. Like I said, I had a natural ability. So the natural ability allowed me to navigate through the professional part of the music business with older people really quickly.
yeah.
But I didn't have the experience as a human being. And so I was this little kid trying to grasp, like adult situations and a music business when I was still a kid, in hindsight. Back then I didn't think I thought I knew everything, of course. But in hindsight, I was really a young person. I even went out and auditioned for Hair. I played for the pit band of Hair with the Broadway musical in Texas when I was still a junior in high school because a friend of mine had gotten in the cast that was a little older than me, and he had me come out to
Mhm.
look for a guy for a week. And I had that experience. Have you ever seen the movie Almost Famous? When you watch that character who was Cameron Crowe, that's kind of what happened to me, but instead of being a writer, I was a musician. And I went through a very similar experience than that movie. And so when I watched that movie, it's like, oh my God, that happened to me. I got deflowered at 17 and a half on the road with a crazy bunch of people from New York City. So it was pretty wild. But I was accepted as a player, and that's the part that was kind of cool about it. I knew if I could just keep persevering, that eventually I would fit in. But I didn't fit in with those people because they were grown-ups. I was not a grown-up. I was like a little kid.
Yeah. So like now that you know that you're older, I'm not saying you're old, just older. So don't get on me.
I just had my
But
birthday.
so so as a and you're looking at yourself back then when you say that you didn't grasp you were young in an old person's world. Would you tell that kid something different? Would you go through that a little bit differently, on how to navigate through that, or would you kept it the same?
I would have stayed in college and I would have worked harder and gotten over my own. I had kind of an ego at that point because people were blowing smoke up my ass. They were saying, "Oh, you're so good at it. You're so young. It's hard to believe." Blah blah blah. And so I started getting real cocky. And so at CSUN, when I didn't make the jazz band, instead of just staying in there, because they did offer me bass in the C band, I could have done that and worked my way up and completed my education and even become more connected with the studio musician scene in Los Angeles, which is really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a studio musician. Was my dream because I had some guys in Sacramento where I grew up who had done that in their careers and they were actually living in Los Angeles. And when I would go down there and visit, they would kind of bring me in a little bit. But I just didn't have the connections and I didn't have the maturity yet to pull that off. So if I would have stayed in college and I would have just stayed living with my parents, for instance, and not gone on the road, I probably would have had a little better wisdom chops as well as my musical maturity and my my socio cultural, chops together so I could learn how to navigate with people a little better. So yeah, looking in
Right.
hindsight, that might have been a good thing to do.
Okay. And with all the opportunities coming at you fast, like that was kind of a big choice to make on that end. Like, do you want to wait or miss the opportunity kind of thing back then?
Yeah, and I've talked to several child prodigy people. Now, I wasn't a child prodigy, I was more like a teen prodigy. But I've talked to
Hmm.
people that were not only teen prodigy, but they were child prodigies, that they had the same issues happen with them. And when they finally got to be adults and they tried to absorb into the professional part of the business, there were parts missing. There were things there that didn't connect. And it wasn't the playing, and it wasn't the chops, and it wasn't the musicality, it was the personality. They weren't able to blend easily with others and share and be a team player and humble themselves. Say that was the kind of stuff that I could have probably, honed in a little better before I dove into the studio scene. But I will say this, the studio scene was evaporating at that time. And as I fast forwarded my dream to get into the studio thing, which I can tell as we go on in the story here, it was good that I was prepared to get in quick because it was evaporating, and I got in on the tail end of it, which was nice. Had I waited and gone to college and gotten a degree, by the time I got out and like started really getting active, it might have been even more
Right.
evaporated. So it's
Right.
all about timing, So it's you never know.
Yeah. Yeah, man. When did you get in with the Steve, was it the Steve Miller Band?
That was
When did that?
there's a big hole in there, but I'll kind of chip through it real quick. I did come back off the road with that band. I did do some other bands in town, and just skipped around to cover bands or whatever. And I met a guy named Jeff who was really talented, and he and I were going to start another cover band. And we were looking for a female vocalist, and that's when he introduced me to my now current wife, Diane, who at that time was kind of a star already. She was doing a great piano trio in town and playing all the biggest and best, steakhouses and, the supper clubs or whatever. And her name is Diane Steinberg. And when I met her, we were thinking maybe she might want to join our band, but it was just a fluke. She didn't need to. She was already had a record deal under her belt and was getting ready to do a second album. And she didn't need us, but she was very, very kind. And we went and sat in with her and hung for the evening. And I fell in love with this woman. I couldn't believe her. And I didn't think I'd ever see her again. And at one point, she needed a bass player. She got stuck. And all the guys that she normally used, she couldn't get. She called Jeff. He says, "Well, why don't you call Kenny? He's pretty good and he reads." So she called me, and I ended up subbing on her normal bass player gig, and we just hit it off. And then she was the one that got me involved in writing, music publishing, and then eventually, when we did her album, she insisted that I play on it. And I met all the guys in Toto who were playing on her album, Jeff Porcaro and Paige and all those guys, Jay Graydon on guitar. And so it was a really great introduction to some really high AA studio musicians that took me in quickly and got
Mm.
me quickly. So that happened. That went on for a couple of years. I got in another band. We did some records. I did some writing. The drummer for that band was a guy who happened to play. His name is Gary Malaber. He happened to play on most of Steve Miller's hits that had already come and happened, between 77, 78. Because when I met this guy, it was about 80. Steve was already kind of like a has-been by 81. He was kind of floundering and looking for material. And then he called Gary looking for material one day when we were trying to go for our own record deal off of another band that we'd been in. And that's when he took the songs that I had co-written with Gary and a guy named John, and that became the Abracadabra album in the winter of 1981. And I wasn't in the band. I was just a writer at that point. And he asked me to come in and help co-produce the record over Capitol and sort of finish it up for Christmas. And that's when eventually I got a phone call from him to say, look, you play guitar and bass on this, you wrote songs on this, why don't you just come out and tour with us and join the band? That was in the beginning of 1982 is when I started touring with Steve Miller. I didn't have to audition. I just written songs that he needed, and I met him as a peer, and I supplied him with some material, and he asked me to help promote that material with his band. So that's how I got in.
Wow. Wow. So what's it like touring, like being on that stage and having all those fans coming at you? Like,
It was 42 years ago.
wow. That, I mean, that had to be a great feeling. Or were you even scared to be on the stage like that with so many people just staring at you playing?
No, I'd already recorded records with stars by then as a studio musician. I'd already done some touring with some not super big people, but somewhat well known. Billy Burnett, eventually from Fleetwood Mac, Vito Sanfilippo. He was a bass player and a singer that was in Tower of Power for a while. So there were people that I was playing with and doing things with prior to meeting Steve. I played a Billy Preston record. As a studio guy, I played on some big records, the Dave Mason, blah, blah, blah. So I met them in the studio and got to know them personally as I was making music with them. I wasn't playing on stage with them, but that was not a big deal for me because I've been on stage for so long with all that cover band and stuff. I was over stage fright by then, and everything was no big deal. So by then, when I would go on stage with Steve Miller, just the size of the crowd was a little bigger. That was something that I had to get used to. But it wasn't any different than a small club. Because, when you play for a large audience and you're playing at night or you're playing indoors, the lights are hitting the stage. They're not hitting the audience so much. And you can only see about the first 10 rows, even if that, maybe 8. So you're really only playing for
Mm.
the first 8 rows. Everything beyond that is darkness and just a bunch of lights flashing.
Oh, well, did the lights ever bother you with all that being on, like while you were playing?
It bothered me once when I was in a cornfield in Iowa about 11 years ago, and the spotlights were coming from the mix position, and it was like a fest.
Uh-huh.
And we hadn't gotten on stage earlier that day because everybody was just going back and forth. We never got any time on that stage. I ended up at the end of the show walking to the edge of the stage and doing some antics with the signer, and
It does have to be fun.
fell off stage because those headlights were blinding me. I had dark glasses on. I couldn't see the edge of the stage. They hadn't taped it properly. I fell off
Oh,
stage 11 feet and broke 7 ribs and a piece of my spine.
oh,
So
oh no.
that's when the lights bothered me.
Yeah, a little too much there. So with those interpreters, I've always been curious because I see them on different people's, even nowadays, different people's uh when they're playing. Do they practice with you guys beforehand, or how does that work? Like, because they're really good at what they do.
Clarify that question a little more. You talk about the opening act, or you talking about
Well,
our
no, just in general, you see them nowadays at concerts and all types of places.
talking about
I've
our
always been curious.
you're talking about
Just your band,
yeah.
just yeah, just with your experience with interpreters. I mean, but I've always been seeing them in different venues and different people's stuff. But do they practice with you guys, or because
Who's
they're really good?
we?
The interpreters, the interpreters
Oh, you're talking about
going
the
at the concerts,
signer?
the
Are you
sign language. Yeah, yeah.
No, they just get a set list ahead of time. And what they do is they go in and they get the lyrics for those songs online. And then what they do is they just sort of look, make sure there's no word they can't, they have to come up with a sign for. But basically, they're just watching a screen with the lyrics going by, kind of like a monitor. And so they're
Mm,
listening, and while they're listening, they're interpreting and they're translating in real time. But they've already kind of rehearsed it with a lyric sheet.
okay. Yeah, because I know there's ad lib in there too.
You don't rehearse with them. They just do that in real time on their own. We don't hire them either. That's something the promoter does if they feel, and they're not at every show. They're only at certain venues with certain promoters.
Wow, that's some skill. Like, I've always wondered that because that is some real skill with ad libbing and
Yeah, it's no different than any other translator. Like, let's say you spoke Chinese, and you sat there and you were at a meeting where they were negotiating the contract, and neither one of them spoke their own languages. You could sit there in real time, and just they would say Chinese to you, and you would immediately make that English and tell the other person, and vice versa. That's what translators do. So they're just doing the same thing, but they're just doing it with hands. They don't make any
that's
sound.
pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Well, that answers my question on that. Um, you were saying you were just touring with Journey recently?
Yeah, this summer we
That's
went out and did a selected city tour with Journey and Def Leppard. We were the opening act, Journey was the middle act, and Def Leppard closed. And we did about, I think, 16, 17 shows with them. We could have done more, but Steve just, he just turned 81, so he doesn't want to do 2, 3 nights in a row anywhere. So he just kind of handpicked what he wanted. They gave him choice of what he wanted to do. He had first pick, and then the next band was Heart, and then the next band was Cheap Trick. It's because Heart did some of them, Cheap Trick did some of them, we did most of them. So that was a pretty big tour. We've done those before, and we've toured with Journey before. We had Tower Power as our opening act on that one. That was about 2015, I think. But yeah, we've toured with them about 3 times, and Santana a couple times. We even opened for the Eagles a year ago, last October, in about 4 or 5 cities when Steely Dan had to bow out because Donald Fagen had some intestinal problems. He had to have an operation, so we substituted for them. So we play some pretty big venues with some pretty big groups, and Steve's music is still really popular on classic rock radio. A lot of people may not know the name because he's not really a visual artist. He's not like a character.
mm,
He's not like a Steven Tyler or a Mick Jagger or something. He's just a guy like
right.
John that just goes out there and so he just goes out and services his catalog is what he does because the catalog is huge. I mean, he's got 14 hit records that play on radio all the time. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot
Yeah.
more than most bands.
Yeah, and some of the songs are in the movies too. So it's like a um like when you hear the song, you see the movie kind of a
Sure.
popular, you know.
Then
Uh,
Eminem, then Eminem just took our Abracadabra track. In fact, that was the track that I helped Steve with when
mm,
I joined the band. That was the album I was being invited to help with. They just took that track and Eminem took that track, wrote new lyrics to it, made a song out of it called Houdini, but he still uses the abracadabra. He just doesn't say reach out and grab it. He just says, and just like that, I am back, bro. That's what he says. He says, abracadabra,
ah,
like that, I am back, bro. It's like he
yeah,
oh, but he had to pay Steve, and they split it, and it was huge, and it just won a VMA award, and it was number one all over the world a couple months ago. So Steve's still in there, even with the hip hop generation.
yeah. That's pretty cool. Like the Eminem utilize. I didn't realize that Eminem. I knew it was familiar. I just didn't know like
Yeah,
where that came from.
Houdini. Have you heard Houdini?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, well
Yeah,
that's our song. That's Abracadabra.
that's wow. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Now Santana, that's a big one. I've loved Santana forever. I mean, all of those people, actually, all those, everybody, every one of the last one of those, I loved. My dad played those CDs all the time, but I actually liked them too. So, not saying that old fogey stuff. You know what I mean? Like my grandma loved it, but no, I actually fell in love with it too.
The reason why is that Carlos doesn't sing, so he brings in younger, modern, musicians that younger people can relate to, and he allows them to co-write with them, and then he has them on the records, and so he crosses over to a younger generation. Whereas Steve has not done that. Steve remains the lead singer on all of his products, and he hasn't put out a new record since 1990. Well, I'll take that back. In 2008, we came out with a blues record called Bingo, and it was up for a blues rock award at the Blues Music Awards in Memphis. But he hasn't had a new product out since then. And he doesn't really need to, because he's what's considered a classic rock act. And there's no real radio format or streaming format for classic rock acts with new material.
Right.
Otherwise, it would be classic rock. It would be something new. So,
Yeah.
when Bonnie Raitt puts out a new record these days, which just happened about 4 years ago, you know, there's no format for her to be played on, because there's no radio stations playing new releases of classic rock artists. They're just going to play her old hits because that's what everybody wants. And that's what happens with Steve. So he doesn't need to make new records anymore. He just services his old catalog over and over again, and those baby boomers just keep coming. And then there's also younger people that remember the songs because their parents played them while they were growing up, and they like them too. So we have a younger generation that also comes to our shows. So it overlaps over about 3 or 4 generations. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So with that difference, when you guys were playing back in when it was really, really up there and having those good platforms, and the difference now, like how was that? I mean, it's the same people, just different ages. So like how are you guys connecting? You guys connecting pretty well with that too?
Well, yeah. Well, when you asked that question, I'm assuming you mean what's it like when you have a hit record in your career, and what's it like when you're an old classic rock act in
Well,
your. Is
well,
that what you're asking?
connecting in the concert, the difference in the concerts, like you're still doing concerts, but they're
The difference is the age group. I mean, when you have a hit record, you're usually related to a younger audience because back in the old days when it was a lot of terrestrial radio, you'd hear the record, you'd go out and you'd buy it. It was a physical piece. You'd see the pictures of the band and the people and the record, and then you become kind of like romantically involved, and you'd want to go see the show because that was your church. Because when we were all
right.
growing, these bands were like our deities, I mean, that's the way it was, we didn't go to
Yeah.
like you and I do now to go to show because the bands were the idols that we wanted to, worship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though we weren't supposed to, according to the Ten Commandments.
Right. Yeah. You know,
But nowadays, when a classic rock goes out, and we played like we did this summer, the size of the crowd was still the same. It's just that it was older people, and they were paying more money. We were making more money. It was an exclusive kind of a thing. The hits are very sentimental for a lot of those people. So instead of experiencing them in real time with the idolatry thing, the people are just coming to harken back to a time where they can sentimentally become a kid again and remember their song and their favorite band and hear their favorite song, you know, and buy a T-shirt.
yeah.
It's more sentimental than it is spiritual. Because when I was young and I'd go, we were all smoking weed, we're all freaked out. Oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world. Now people, they do that, but it's more sentimental and they're a little more sober about the reason why they're there.
Right. Yeah. You hear the I was dancing to this song at my wedding kind of things. So, like,
But to answer your question, that's the only difference. It's just age group and the attitude. That's it.
okay. Okay. Yeah. So now you said you were making guitars and all that stuff too. How do you find all this time to do all that?
I've been doing that all my life. I mean, I've always tinkered and I've always been around electronics and I've always been around woodwork. And I did work in that field very early in Los Angeles. Before I became the studio musician, I was doing things with a company called Delta, which was an upstart guitar amp company. I became a quality control manager of that. It went under. And then we started Schecter Guitars, which some of your listeners out there will know the name Schecter. I started it with Dave Schecter. He and I were the first two people. He was the genius behind the product, and I was his Igor, helping him wind the pickups
Mhm.
together. And the company grew, and we eventually bought and sold it a couple times. I didn't own any part of it. I was just a paid Igor, employee, but it was fun. Uh, I eventually pulled out of it because I got busy playing. But, I
Mm.
was involved in some kind of company. Eventually, there was a break in my career, and I ended up working at JBL Harman, which is a huge company in Northridge, California. And they bought a guitar amp company called Rivera. And I ended up starting to work with a guy named Jack Sani. Like myself, he was a guy that had been in a big band called Dire Straits, and he did Dire Straits in their heyday, and he and I we're not touring much anymore, so he worked for JBL. We're making guitar amps, so I've done all that all my life. And when I was at a music store as a kid, I learned how to do frets and finishes. And this bass you're seeing right here is something I built at the beginning of this year. This is actually my backup. My first one I made is made from a piece of spruce, one piece of spruce, which is the body here, and
Mm.
500-year-old piece of spruce that was in a beam in Ben Franklin's birth house in Boston, Massachusetts. A guy reclaimed the beam. He bought the wood, and I met this guy through friends, and he said, "What do you want?" I said, "I need a bass. I want to make my own bass. I can't find a bass that I like. I needed a five-string P bass. This is a like a Fender five-string bass, but this is a five-string, and I just needed a little narrower neck at the 12th fret. I wanted a jazz bass body with a P bass neck. I mean, idiosyncrasies. You can't go out and buy it, so I made one. I didn't think it would be good enough to use, but when I brought it out on the road and I plugged it in, our sound guy, who's also our manager, said, "That thing sounds great. Why don't you just start using that? Because you like playing it, because it felt better in my hands." So then I had to make a backup, and that's this one. And this one was made from the choir loft of a Catholic church from Boston that was about 300 years old, called Our Lady of Victories. It's also a sister church to Notre Dame in Paris. So when they tore down this Catholic church, there was the spruce again that was in the choir loft, and I got that piece, and I made this as a backup. Now, you ask yourself, well, why are you using reclaimed wood? It's just kind of cool. It's got history, but the one piece spruce is
Yeah.
very hard to find, and especially when it's that aged, and when the wood's aged and there's no more uh, moisture content in it, and it's very dry.
Hmm.
It's a great resonance, and spruce is what they use on violins, cellos, double basses, and acoustic guitars to get that incredible vibration. So I figured, why not make a bass body out of spruce? Nobody ever does that. They make them out of ash. They make them out of alder. This is spruce, and depending upon the grain, makes a completely different sound. So there's a very unique bass, maple neck. Seymour Duncan pickups. God, I can't get it straight because everything's reversed on the screen. And
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that.
no electronics. It's just the way Leo Fender designed it. It's just that it's a five with a low B string on it, which is kind of a modern.
Okay.
So, that's why I had to make it, because they just don't make anything like this the way I made this. So I made two of these, and eventually I took pictures of the whole thing. I'm going to try to sell it to Vintage Guitar Magazine and have them do a special on it, because I show all the steps and how it was built and everything. So people would find it interesting that are luthiers and woodworkers. So that's another hobby I have in addition to fly fishing, because you and I talked
Yeah.
and ocean fishing. I mean, I fish it for anything, but recently I've just really gotten into fly fishing. I just got back from Montana. I have a cabin up there, and I'm fishing at a glacier at the beginning of October, and it was great. And caught a bunch of cutthroats on the backside of Hungry Horse, right near the entrance of Bob Marshall Wilderness and the grizzly habitat that's up there near Glacier National Park. So that was really fun. So I do stuff like that. And I just bought a boat today too. I've never owned a boat.
Oh, what?
I just bought a boat today. It's nothing fancy. It's I'll explain later, but it's just a little fishing boat, but it's pretty interesting the way that it goes together. And you don't have to put it on a trailer and you don't have to put it in the water to store it. You can put it in the back of your garage like I did under a tarp. It's a foldable fishing boat called a porta boat, BOTE. You can look it up online. They make these 12-foot fishing boats. I've never had a boat. And so, I've had inflatables in the past. So now I got a boat.
And this thing is safe? Like, I mean,
It looks just like a regular boat. It looks just like a regular 12-foot aluminum boat you'd go fishing in. It's just that instead of aluminum, it's made out of PVC plastic that's thick, and it all folds up together like a surfboard, and you store it in the back, and
yeah.
you put the seats in it, and it's crazy. It's pretty
Well,
interesting.
well, shoot, I'm going to have to tell my friend like about this thing because we carry the nets, we do everything.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is
Um,
because I have an HOA where I live. I mean, here's
uh-huh.
what it looks like when it's just, I don't know if you could see this, but this is what it looks like when it's
Oh, that's pretty cool.
folded up. This is what it looks like when you put it together. It's just a regular fishing boat.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to tell her about that.
Yeah, it's got a transom, and you can put a motor on it and you go fishing. But I picked it up and put it on the top of my car myself, by myself. And, fold it up and put it back there under a tarp. I don't have to put it in the garage. I don't have to put it on a trailer because the HOA doesn't allow boats outside that are, they don't allow boats outside. You have to go put it in storage somewhere. Because
Yep, mine doesn't either.
we live in
Like,
a woody neighborhood here. So anyway, but that's my
well,
other was fishing.
yeah, you're gonna have to come up here. Really, you're gonna have to come and fish with us.
The bass player that I replaced in the Steve Miller Band is a good friend of mine, and he spent a lot of time up in the Kenai, on a couple of lodges up there,
Yeah,
for all the big fish. And he says, Kenny, you got to get up here, and I've been wanting to do it. I just have not found the opportunity. Usually, when I have some vacation time. I'm married. Instead of, and my wife is not into fishing and she's not into lodges out in the woods. I mean, she wants to go to, New York and stay at a $500 night hotel and go see Broadway shows and stuff. So that's what we do.
yeah,
We just did that 3 weeks ago, and then,
yeah,
a river cruise. Like last year, we went on a river cruise, a Viking river cruise on the Rhine, all through
yeah,
5 or 6 countries. It was great. I totally enjoyed it. I didn't fish the whole time, but we were on the water, and I saw people
yeah.
fishing everywhere, but I didn't have to do it. It was fun.
Oh yeah, the Kenai is where we go. And yeah, that's our salmon place.
Yep.
And so I probably met him. Probably, I don't know. Like we all somehow know each other just for those days that we're there. But
Are you
yeah, the Kenai.
are you have any ancestry of native blood? Because
I do.
you look like you
I'm,
might.
I'm,
I have Mohawk.
yeah.
I have way distant Mohawk, but I am involved in Native American activism. I'm also very good friends
Mm.
with people at Six Nations, which is the
Oh,
uh, reserve up in Canada on the backside of Lake Ontario, at a place called Otsuikan, and that's a really interesting
okay.
Six Nations Iroquois uh, a reserve up there. So I kind of hang out with them. There's a couple other tribes too that I'm very close with too, but I just thought I'd ask.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that native activism because I may have something because I'm working on stuff up here as well with the Alaska Natives one, but I also met this lady who I don't want to get it wrong, but I she came into my college and I had to meet her and she's a lawyer for she's actual native and I cannot remember what she was, but she was dealing with and trying to get the natives to come up or not come up, but to have a voice, and to build things in their communities and whatnots and to
Right.
but so I may need to talk to you about that stuff and see what we can do. But and get everybody together and really get help for the natives because it's interesting.
MIW situation. I've actually produced and written a song with a woman. Actually, I produced it. She wrote it. It was called Missing, and there's a video on YouTube. I can send it to you. It's really good. And then we just did a new one about Chief Joseph from the Nez Perce tribe. Uh,
Hmm.
I think it's Nez Perce is the way they pronounce it. That's a tribe up in Idaho. But Chief Joseph was very famous. He was the guy that invented the Appaloosa horses. And so we wrote a
Oh,
song, Spirit Horses. And I also produced a band called Cody Blackbird. We did a couple, I got a NAMI as a producer from that. So I produce Native American rock acts. And that's another thing I do on the side in addition to my own music and getting stuff in TV and movies and things like that.
okay. Yeah, we'll definitely have to talk off camera. And really really talk about it, because that's near and dear to my heart as well. And keeping one, the Dena'ina language for one is going extinct.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to help them keep their language and bringing that back out in the stories. And and they're the people that they're the elders, the true elders are dying off. So like now it's the Western culture, and the natives, like they're being treated um like the Black people. Like the stories that they have is unbelievable, but they're like, right now they're still in the fact that if you speak your language back then, if you spoke your language, you would get beat. You had to speak English, or be forced into Catholicism by the Russians, so they kind of got jacked up. You know what I mean? So
It's
they're
the,
trying to navigate through this.
it's the residential school problem, and that was all of the United States and Canada, and I've dealt with that a lot too. On Six Nations, they've got one of those schools. They've made a museum out of. They call it the Mush Hole. It's pretty interesting. You should see this place. But yeah, it's a museum for that kind of thing that was going on with the Catholic Church and the nuns and the missionaries, and it was just awful. And so, taking the elders and videotaping them and making sure they record them with the proper
Right.
dialect the languages will help preserve it for you know people that are interested in keeping it going. I do that at Six Nations. There's a school there that I donate money and items to raise money for that school. My friend Michelle Davis is really really good at keeping that language going. And a lot of times she'll only address me in those languages, and I have to kind of look it up and go, well, how am I going to respond? Go look it up. It's pretty.
Right. Yeah, and that's something I was actually, because I do the photography and I'm working in the videography work, learning that. But I'm glad you said that, because that is something I am going to be working on, is video recording. And I had to get permission to do it, through the thing. So I got the permission to do it, and but to record the elders and their stories and their language and all that stuff, and to really work with them.
Creation stories are the ones that are really interesting. And see, that's where all this alt-right Christianity stuff really starts to become a problem, because they look at that as some sort of bad pagan content when really they should be embracing it, and like just saying, look, I mean, the whole idea is to communicate. And how are you going to communicate if you don't know the language and embrace it? So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'm grateful that I met you, honestly, because this would be a
You're singing. You said you sung a bit. Now, are you a musician? Are you a player? Did you perform in bands, or did you write? Or
yeah, back in my day, I was on the praise and worship team, and before that I was in choir in school. And I'm the type of person that will pick up an instrument if you show me where how to properly hold the instrument. um I can figure it out later, figure it out through ear and play it that way. Because me and my friends, we used to trade instruments during the marching band, during our thing. So we'd take it home and
yeah,
or whatever. I was a clarinet, and the
two.
guitar. I have a I have a guitar here. I wanted to learn it. I kind of know piano, but my fingers, I think it was carpal tunnel or something, was messing me up where I couldn't do
Oh, similar.
this part. Yeah, so I'm like, ugh, you know.
Clarinet first, and then I went away from music for a while. The ukulele first, then clarinet, and then went away. And then I came back to nylon string guitar, and I was finally able to reach around the neck when my hands got big enough. But when I tried playing piano and stuff, I just couldn't. I mean, even in college when I was learning all the fingerings and everything, I just felt
Yeah.
uncomfortable. It wasn't my thing, you know. My wife Diane, who is, by the way, an incredible player and writer and singer. She, by the way, I don't know if you ever heard of a movie called Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It came out in 1978 with the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton and Aerosmith and Earth, Wind and Fire. Anyway, it was a cult movie. She played Lucy and this guy with diamonds in it. She's kind of a movie
Oh,
star, writer, pianist, but she's a really good piano player. And so in the house, she's our pianist. Thank goodness.
okay.
Also plays jazz with me, which is great. But I'm the guitar player and bass player. She's the piano player. So we make a good.
Oh, so you got a good Christmas, So you're sitting around the piano.
But back to you. I mean, I did the same as you, same thing, clarinet, and then I felt funny on piano. So were you able to play guitar?
Working on it. I mean, I bought one about a year ago when I had the money. I finally raised the money to do that. And so I was doing lessons because I really, really wanted to figure out, everything. It was just so uncomfortable at one point, but I really couldn't get that whole like where your fingers had to be on the string properly. I was like,
Oh,
oh, this is crap. I could get it if I got it, but that was the part that was killing me.
right.
So
Maybe a
so
horn.
I
Do you ever play flute? You ever try flute?
I have.
Flute?
I didn't like the
I play flute, but it's easier to finger because it's very, very low tension and it's very
Yep.
smooth. That type of woodwind instrument or sax or something, like you said, clarinet. Because if you play clarinet, you'll be able to play flute. It's similar. And
Yeah.
very, very nice instrument to meditate with. You could get native flutes made out of cedar and stuff. I've also
Yeah.
played the flute, and these Native American bands that I've produced, I usually play the Native American flute on there because I just enjoy it. Because I played regular silver flute too, but I really enjoy the wooden flutes. You might want to try that. It might be something because you can just get by yourself and get into like a little canyon or outdoors or somewhere with some echo and some
Yeah.
reverb. You just play, and it's like, it's really spiritual. I mean, it's obviously been around for thousands of years in tribal music. So it's something I suggest try and get a native flute.
Yeah, I'll try that. Because I've been wanting to get back into the music. I got back into my art, but really putting it out there and doing more things with it. And after my neck surgery, the singing kind of went a little off, but it's still there. I think it's more I just have to practice and get it back to
Is that your art, the backdrop there? Is that?
no, no, that's actually the Zoom's art.
Oh,
Like whoever. Yeah, no, my art. I have art on Fine Art America with the photography, and then I paint. Well, I haven't really put anything up on that's on my Facebook mainly. I put some stuff up there, but I just
well, both of our daughters are professional artists. One's an animator at Disney, and then our other one is a curator of museums in Denver and also does her own art that she sells in galleries around the world and stuff. So we got arts
wow.
family too. They both were good musicians. They just didn't want to do it as a living because mom and dad, we were so big in our success and whatever. They didn't want to compete with that. And I don't blame them. But we never tried to make them do music. So they just decided to do art,
Yeah, it's another form. It's just another form of art. Everybody's an artist.
self-expression.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I love museums. That's one of my big secrets. I can stand in a museum all day long. Um like I've loved those like dinosaur museums too. Uh and I found out that we had dinosaurs up here. So they just found a new one up here. Um so
So is
that
there
would be a fun one.
anything else you want to ask me as we get near wrapping up time here?
Well, yeah, we are wrapping up. Any little nuggets that you have, and then whatever legacy that you want to leave on this earth. I'm not putting that in your spirit, but the legacy that God had created for you to do.
Well, why don't you
Catholic.
be a little more specific in your question so I can, because that's a pretty broad, you don't want me to get me started on a broad. You want to give me something
Uh,
specific, otherwise I'll go on for hours.
well, just uh, let's go with the nuggets in the industry, how to navigate with getting through the industry, like, well, nowadays too,
When you say the industry, you mean the music industry,
the music industry.
business end of the music industry.
Yeah, as a kid, as a kid, or how kids are like, oh, I want to be a model and I want to be this, and
So
like you said earlier, they don't want it, they don't know the.
for those young people that are on a career path to want to become a musician.
Yep.
Okay. Well, first of all, music is divided up into about four categories. One is uh, classical, another one is pop, another one is composing, and then another one is performing. Now you can incorporate all those together, but you don't necessarily have to do all those at the same time to be a professional. You can be a professional classical pianist and never write anything. You could be a professional songwriter and never be seen on stage like Diane Warren, who's a multimillionaire. You've probably never even seen her. She's probably one of the biggest writers of the 20th and 21st century combined, for pop music. And then of course, then there's the performance part, which means that you could be copying other people's material or having material written for you, and you could move around on stage in a provocative way. And that's where all these diva acts come in that don't necessarily write for themselves, but they have other people write for them. And they just have a choreographer. There's all these different areas to be successful in the music business. So you just have to kind of see where your skill set is. So at a young age, your teachers will probably tell you, like they did with me. They said, you have a natural proficiency towards fretted instruments. You should go in that field. Or you have a natural proficiency of, playing classical pieces on the piano. You should go into that. Oh, you have a really good balance and you did really well with your ballet and your modern jazz dance. You're very light on your feet. You move and you have your body just expresses itself. You should go into dance and maybe go to Broadway or even ballet and classics. It's all that. So, or you're just a freak and you write weird stuff and your hair color's all weird and you might become a big pop star. You could do that. They could be like Boy George and Cyndi Lauper or whoever. It's like, so it's all those things could happen, but you have to kind of like try them all. And then you have to kind of let water kind of flow to its own level. You have to kind of let it find its own level, which means that try them all and you'll see what thing gravitates where it rests and where it pools. And you'll have support from family and instructors and stuff. It'll kind of guide you. And you have to listen to them because you may want to do something else because you're just a kid and you're kind of stubborn. No, I don't want to do that. I want to rock, because that's the way I was. It's like I didn't want to play jazz. I didn't want to do classic. I wanted to rock because I wanted to get attention and I wanted to meet girls. You know what I mean? It's like, this is why my problem that I was talking about earlier about being young in the mind, I just decided to go into a field that allowed me to have these little creature comforts because they were more important. Being excellent at my craft, which is something I should have spent a little more time with early on to do. And so that leads right up into, okay, now you're in high school, you're in a choir program like yourself, or band program like myself. And then, you're going to see where that water settles because gravity knows where it's supposed to go. And if it's a crack over here, it might flow over here. There may be a pool under the ground you haven't seen where the water settled. You might have to dig a little bit to find it, but that's where water settled and that's where you need to be. And so that's where you have to kind of let nature kind of help you find that your skill set is a God-given gift that was given to you before you were even born. And that's the thing you can't take for granted. You have to be able to identify that and look at it and embrace it. And as a music teacher, when I teach students sometimes, I can tell the ones that have that gift and the ones that don't. Now, do I try to discourage the ones that don't? No, of course not. Because if you practice and put a lot of time in, you can sound pretty good at your craft. It's like, there's people that I can name names right now that are very big professional, successful people that, in my opinion, don't have natural ability, but because they work really hard at their craft, they persevered. Then there's others that I see that had natural abilities that were my students that didn't nurture it. They ended up going to another field just because they were listening to their parents or their guidance counselor at school, and they had this gift and they just abandoned it because they wanted to go more for the norm. They wanted to, get their degree and get the money and get the office and get the job and the cubicle or the practice or whatever it is. I see it as a teacher and I go, God, what a shame. They could have really been very successful in music, but they didn't notice their natural gift and nurture it. So that's the thing you got to do, is just ask people to help you identify your skill set and put that time into it. And then you got to put in the 10,000 hours. And that's the problem that a lot of these young people today don't do, because they think that because of the way that the nature of, streaming and, all the video stuff and the influencers, and the way that you can like get your reach increased and, blah, blah, blah. They don't bother to learn how to play an instrument. They don't learn how to read music. They don't learn the classics. And then when they finally get to a successful level, like where they are, like Taylor Swift, for instance, I mean, she doesn't play an instrument. She just gets up there and she has some lyrics that people help her write songs with, but she's not playing anything. She just kind of sings. And if she were to sit down at a campfire with an acoustic guitar, I don't know if she'd be able to entertain us. Maybe she could. I don't.
Right.
I mean, I'm not taking anything away from her. She's huge and she's, very generous and she seems like a nice person. But that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Not everybody's going to be able to get to that success point that way, If you take your skill sets and you get your 10,000 hours in on your instrument or your voice or whatever, and really, really train, then when the opportunity arises, you'll be prepared and you'll be able to bring it. Because, when you're on the spot and that spotlight hits, you can't have any stage fright, and you got to deliver, and you got to be excellent instantaneously without any wavering, with total confidence. And that is the thing that practice will bring you with which setting. But those are the few little nuggets that I can share with you. And again, music business has changed too. It's not as easy anymore. It's like now it's almost better to go on the internet and just sort of build your audience. And you don't necessarily have to have all these skills, because there's so many other visual stimulus and sounds and things and whatever that we didn't have when we were kids, that you could use now as an attractor or flypaper to build your audience. You don't have to be so talented. You don't have to be so clever. You don't even really need to have incredible lyrical messages. You could just have sounds and ooh la la, it's just really interesting. But you can build an audience and you can get successful on your own. Like there's a lady that I know, I just talked about, Taylor Swift. Here's a woman named, I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, she built her career online without any hit records, without any radio, without anything, and wrote her own material and just promoted it herself over a period of time and built an audience by traveling and touring. And, she does very well and makes a pretty good living. And she's married with kids and still has this dream that she's fulfilling in addition to being a mom. And all that stuff is pretty interesting. And so you can do that without a record label and without any terrestrial radio, coverage. It's kind of interesting. One of the first groups that did that was Grateful Dead. And that was way back, they had a couple of Friend of a Devil and Truckin', but they weren't really known for their singles. They were known for their experience. Dave Matthews, another example, jam band. No hit records on the radio. He's built a huge audience just going out and playing. So if you go out and perform,
Right.
you can do that. It's a tough road. It takes a while, but you can do it. And that's different than what we grew up with. We grew up with terrestrial radio, record deals, studios, crafted pieces of music that were like little nuggets that got in your ear like ear candy and just drove you crazy. Abracadabra, I want to reach out. That was the stuff that we were writing because we knew that it would be ear candy and it would continue to, get reach like it did all over the world. Plus, the word that we chose, abracadabra, was known throughout all the languages in the world. Maybe they didn't understand the verse or understood that word. So that's
That's true.
to consider when you're writing too. Don't get too complicated. Keep it simple when you're writing lyrics. Anyway, so those are some nuggets. I hope that that will help you. And if you want to go to my website, kennyleelewis.com, you can send me an email there and we can talk. I'll put you on my mailing list. I also have some things. This is a jazz guitar album I did quite a while ago, probably about 10 years ago, but it is still available
Oh,
on Amazon. It's an instrumental jazz guitar album called Kenny Lee Lewis New Vintage. And you can get it on Amazon or CD Baby. I'm also a novelist. I wrote a book. This is called Skeleton, and this particular volume is called Children of the Tower. Where is that written? Oh, it's on the back. Children of the Tower. I've actually written 3 of these books, but this is the only one that I've published myself. I'm still looking for an agent, but this has done very well on its own. Skeleton Dolls, Children of the Tower, Kenny Lee Lewis. You can buy it electronically or a hard copy on Amazon. And I got more stuff coming, but right now I'm just, been touring with the Steve Miller Band and do my own bands around the Central Coast here. And I do lessons online. I also have a lesson that's on TrueFire. If you go to truefire.com, that is a celebrity lesson site where you can see a lot of different celebrities giving guitar and bass lessons. I have one that's called Rhythm Renaissance, Kenny Lee Lewis Rhythm Renaissance. It's a master class for how to play rhythm guitar because, everybody teaches how to play lead stuff. Well, I'm teaching you how to play rhythm stuff because if you become a really good rhythm guitar player, you can become a good bass player. And vice versa, you become a good bass player, you become a good rhythm guitar player. So that's on truefire.com, and you can buy that masterclass through that website. So there's some products, and that's the stuff that I do when I'm not doing other things. I have a thing called Fillmore Tribute. If you go on Facebook, there's a website there called Kenny Lee Lewis Presents a Fillmore Tribute. We probably won't be playing in your town because we are just kind of playing regionally around California here, mostly in Los Angeles. But it's a pretty cool thing. It's a tribute to all the acts that played the Fillmore Auditorium when I was a kid during the Flower Power generation when Bill Graham was bringing us all that music like I talked about earlier in San Francisco, which just really made the Bay Area a musical mecca throughout the world, including Carlos Santana and the Steve Miller Band, John Fogerty, all those things. Great Jefferson Airplane, Tower of Power. I could go on. They were all Journey. They were all Bay Area bands. So that's
that's
it.
pretty cool. That's pretty cool. What's your book about? Like, that was kind of interesting.
Okay, well, if you want to know a little bit about the book was based on a true story. The bass player that used to be the Steve Miller Band was going with a twin, identical twin, as a matter of fact, and she was gorgeous. And I eventually met her sister, and they were very nice people that came and helped us build our cabin. We were building a cabin up in Montana. And I met their mother, and their mother was very interesting. She was a horsewoman, and she told me some stories about what these twins were like when they were little. And it just put my hair on my arms just came flying up the arms. I said, can I put this into a book? It was crazy. If you've ever looked up online, if you Google a term called twin speak
Yeah.
is a real thing where twins speak in their own languages when they're little. Have you ever known any twins, Christina?
I've known twins, and I heard about, where they have that whole own language.
We usually don't hear it because usually they lose it by the time they start going to grammar school. So we don't ever hear it. But if you are
Mm.
friends with a neighbor when they're real little, you might have heard it. But the parents definitely remember because they speak in their own languages and nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. And they totally understand. Okay, so that's a real thing. Well, these twins did that. And the mother started telling me about all the scary shit they used to do with telepathy and all the other stuff. And they used to hold hands and they used to sing in these languages and stuff. Oh my God. So what happened is that she started telling me stories about some of the stuff they did when they were little. And I just went, could I make this like a Stephen King, Dan Brown kind of book? And she went, sure, just change the names. And I did. And so the first 10 chapters are based on a true story. And basically what I write about in this book is that this language is the same language that you hear in church when people talk in tongues. It's a spirit language that we all used to speak. If you go to the Old Testament in Genesis, they talk about how we used to all speak the same language. And this leads up until the Tower of Babel, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. The Tower of Babel is where the word Babylon comes from. And the reason why it's
Hmm.
is because the tower, all of a sudden, somewhere, some way, the human race, who were all speaking the same language at the same time and used to speak directly to God with this language, by the way, like Noah, when God said, build the ark by so many cubits. How many cubits was that? It was 50 cubits. Oh, thanks. I mean, in the Bible, it says they used to have conversations in this language. I didn't write this. That's in the Bible.
Right.
So in my book, what happened in the Bible, in the Tower of Babel story, is that we got real smart, we got real good at math, we got real good at construction, and we built this tower that went up into the sky, and it was so tall, it went into the clouds. And they even talk about riding chariots up to the top. And we're not talking about going up the side. We're talking about flying to the top. It's like this is some alien stuff. It was very bizarre.
Right.
I didn't write it. So let's just talk about the tower. So the tower is so high, they built this thing tall because they wanted to be closer to God. And God took it as interpretation according to the Old Testament and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that people got too smart. They started thinking of themselves as gods themselves. And because they were trying to elevate themselves to the level of God, literally with this tower, God, the creator, if you will, got angry because he just wanted everybody to just worship it, whatever that creator is. And he destroyed the tower. And not only did he destroy the tower, he destroyed the language. And in Greek, when you do the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it basically says he confounded the language. Didn't mean he destroyed language all across the board. He just made it so those people couldn't talk to each other. They couldn't understand each other anymore. So when they spoke to one another, they were speaking in a language they didn't understand. And that's all the people. So it was all these different languages happening at once. And so those people all traveled throughout the different parts of the world and started their own societies and their own tribes. And those languages is what went out of the world and became all the different languages that we know today, including,
Right.
Hebrew and all that stuff. So in my book, this language was the language that Merlin of the Celtic Druids was using when he was doing his incantations and changing things and able to, become 400 years old and all the stuff that if you ever go into the legends of Merlin, who actually was a real person, if you read about him, it was a person that they wrote about back during the days when the first Saxons and the first Vikings were coming in, and he was a druid. So anyway, that language, when the Catholic Church, just like with this, residential school thing we talked about with Native Americans, when they came into Britain and they started listening to these incantations in this language, they banned that language because it was an ancient language that had power. You could summon the seraphim angels and get things done. And you could even put life back into somebody when the archangel Samiel was called, not Samuel, Samiel, would come and they could actually reanimate the person by putting the animus back into the body through this singing and this language. And so anyway, that's what this book involves, and these twins are able to do that. And it's passed down from mother to daughter. It's a matriarchal tradition, but it has to be done in secret because it's been banned by the church.
That's quite interesting.
That's the book.
I'll have to grab it.
I mean, the book, I've never had a publisher. I've never had an agent. I've just sold these online, and everybody that buys it just loves it. And because I published it, I have trouble getting an agent interested because unless you're selling hundreds of thousands of copies, they're not interested in getting involved because you've already released it, you've kind of blown it, you've already done the art, you've already got your chapters and your characters set up. They want to be involved in all that while you're developing your book. And if you've already done it, you've kind of blown the whole thing because it's interesting. It's just different than music. In music, you can put out a CD and you can sell it. And if it starts selling well, you can get a label interested and they'll distribute it because it's selling, But books is different. It's really weird in the literary world. They don't want to take you on as a writer unless you have fresh meat. So I did have a sequel. I tried selling it to them, but it had too much politics and it involved the last election and they didn't want to be involved. So there you go. I'll probably Write it and put it out on another thing. But I have other books too that I'm going to be putting out soon. But I am also a novelist, so go check this one out, and there's more coming.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, we thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate it.
your historical piece is so interesting, and definitely I'm going to be calling you that's or emailing you. But but yeah, I absolutely loved it, and definitely would love to work with you on different things. Definitely, and to get you here to Alaska, and we can find something for your wife too to do. There's
Oh man,
always something for everybody up here.
her history makes mine look like nothing. You got to get her history. She grew up in Memphis with Elvis, and when jazz became rock and roll, her whole family
What?
basically involved with the history of American music from the time of W.C. Handy 100 years ago up until Stax Records when her uncle co-wrote and played on Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs, which I just heard on the radio today.
What?
Unbelievable history. So yeah, you got to get her on. She's a trip. I'm also on Facebook with 3 or 4 sites, including the Fillmore Tribute in my own name and bands. And then I'm also on YouTube with my own channel. You can find that, and on Instagram as well. So I'm available on all those formats. Oh, and Blue Sky.
Okay.
Just got on Blue Sky. You should check that out. That's kind of like
That,
the orphan holding for all of us liberals that got damaged in this last election. We built our own little site now called Blue Sky.
oh, I think I heard about that. I didn't look into what it was, but I think I seen that on TikTok or something where people are putting that up.
Yeah, you're not seeing a bunch of MAGA crowd on that one, I'll tell you right now.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't looked into that, but I think I did hear that. Um, but yeah, if you could put a little bug in your wife's ear, that'd be great. Like we would love to have her and have both of you on.
Steve Joyner, who introduced me to you, is her friend, and that's how I met you, was through her friend Steve Joyner.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know that. You know Steve Joyner? You know who he is?
Absolutely. He's my PR.
There you go.
So
He was the guy that was a friend of Diane's, and that's how I met you.
okay. Yeah. That's pretty cool though. Yeah, we definitely want to hear both of you on one panel, and just really, really tell it all.
Me and her, it's like I Love Lucy show with Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
The other 48 years, so we have some pretty funny husband-wife banter inside of all the art.
Oh, I want to know it all. I want that banter. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
But
have a great holiday season, and just keep in touch, and keep it going, and keep them tight lines, baby.
for sure. For sure. I'll send you some pictures when we go fishing. You'd be
Yeah,
like, well, wish you were here. I'll send you those kind of picture postcards.
always with pictures with fish. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I'll do that for you. But yeah, definitely. Thank you for coming on and
Mohawk
totally enjoy.
Mohawk language, I say niwe, or you could say niawe goto, niawe, and that means thank you in Mohawk.
Oh, awesome. N- Was it Niawe
Niawe
Goto?
goto, like
Oh,
that. Thank you very much.
Goto.
Niawe.
Niawe Goto. Okay, that's awesome. Well, I learned something new for sure. Like, awesome. Well, I will see you on the other side of this video. Thank you. All right.